You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative, and to help me in assembling the Avengers, it's John Mills.
And here we are. We've suddenly leapt backward to the 1940s somehow. So we've taken our first real time-lapse leap backward in time.
That's true.
Unless and of course it creates a delicious little contradiction somewhere along the way, but we can talk about that when we get there.
Well, and there is a time whiplash in this movie because we start in the present, go back to the past, and then the movie ends in the present. So, or
yes,
quote unquote, the present then. So, but
to quote Spaceballs, when will then be now? Soon.
Yes. Now. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we are excited to be here because, we're at the last movie before we reach the first team up of Avengers. We're here at Captain America, the first Avenger. But is he the first Avenger? I don't know. Will he be a retcon later on? We'll talk about it when we get there. But before we do, thank you so much for checking out Assembling Avengers here with the 602 Club feed. We hope you're enjoying the bonus show. Of course, make sure you're subscribed so you do get the show as soon as it drops. And we would love to have a star rating review from you over there on Apple Podcasts, help people find the show. Just make sure you're subscribed, though. So, again, you just get the shows as soon as they drop here in the 602 Club feed. If you're liking the show and you want to reach out to us, we'd love to hear from you. So please, go over to somewhere like Twitter. You can find us there at the 602 Club. Follow us and comment. We'd love to have your comments. Just use the hashtag Assembling Avengers. Of course, you can find us on Instagram as well at the 602 Club, TFM. We got the entire network over at Trek.fm where you can see all of the shows we're doing. There's so much happening for you there. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. There's a listeners-only discussion group there called the Babel Conference you can join and talk to listeners from all over the world what's going on here in the network. And if you do like the network and you want to make sure that shows keep coming to you, Patreon is the best place to go to help us make sure that happens. So go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of the team. So, John, I don't know if you know this, but something I was really interested in, again, before we even get to the movie, was a director question. And two directors, actually, who have previously directed in the MCU were actually interested in doing Captain America before they got their said movies. One, Jon Favreau, and then the other, Leterrier, who did Incredible Hulk. And so... do you feel like they either of them could have been good choices here? And I want to preface that by saying before we answer that question, Jon Favreau had the idea of making this more of a comedy. And so with all that in mind, do you think either of those directors would have done what we get here with Joe Johnston or been a good choice?
I think that Favreau would have been a fine choice. I think that his impulse for comedy could have worked. I think that it could have worked in the sense that it would have been like a Guardians of the Galaxy type of comedy, which is it works in universe and stuff like that. Basically, this is where I tip my hand and I say, I have faith in Favreau. And, that could be me going back. And at the time, after seeing Iron Man 2, I probably would have said, oh, no, I don't want him doing Captain America. I didn't like Iron Man 2. But now looking at the totality of his work and what he's brought to the Star Wars universe and stuff like that, then I sort of roll back and think back, well, he probably could have made it work pretty well. Leterrier, this would have been swinging it serious in the other direction, I think. I think that he was likely interested very much in the whole... You can see how the super soldier serum question would have fit into his view of the Hulk and stuff like that.
Right.
How that would have worked in.
Right.
I can also say that Johnston is a logical choice for this type of movie. The way it turned out, it very much fits his style. But the thing is, I want to roll it back before the directors. I want to come at the title here, and this is something that I've been sitting with for a very long time, which is this is Captain America: The First Avenger. It's not Captain America. It's not Captain America 1. We have Iron Man. We have Iron Man 2. We have the Incredible Hulk. We have Thor. There's no after title for them. There's no subtitle. And one of the things that I find interesting is that this is Captain America: The First Avenger, which is obviously a marketing choice. It's to get the audience primed for the Avengers. It's purposely titled that way to make everything tie in. Whereas a movie that came out later, Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, was hacked on because they said, oh, well, that's just a bunch of marketing terms that they put together. I've made fun of it over time, calling it, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Marketing keywords, right? But then looking at this, I want to get your take. Do you think that people unfairly overlook the fact that Captain America does the exact same thing here and doesn't get called out for it?
Yeah, it is really interesting that you asked that question because it's not something I had thought of until now. And I think they're priming you for the Avengers, and mainly too because that's how this movie ends, right? With the stinger to give you the trailer, the first trailer for Avengers. That's the Avengers that's coming out. So, absolutely, they are playing on that. And in fact, the title was originally The First Avenger, Captain America, and then they switched it. But at the same time, I think logically it makes sense because before it gets retconned, and again, that's a question for another day, Captain America is the first person that, and the basis for the Avengers Initiative, in the sense of, like, he is the original. He was the original in this universe. Like, he is the Superman of this universe in that sense. Whose movie isn't first, but he is literally the first one to exist superhero-wise that would go on to be the thing that inspires the Avengers. At least that's the way it plays out in Phase 1. And all the way until we get to Phase 3, again, when it's retconned. Anyway. So I don't mind that, and I don't have a problem with it. It never bothered me. But I mean, I think it's ridiculous to even try to argue that it's not about the marketing, not just for this film, but for what's coming up next, which the Marvel Universe at this point is doing, which is we're not just priming you for the movie you're watching, but what's coming up. And
right.
So,
But the thing is, I know I don't think either one of us have a problem with it. But do you think that basically this is an early indicator of the bias against the DC universe because people hack on Batman versus Superman for it, whereas they let Captain America: The First Avenger slide? Sure.
I mean, it could be. I think it is an interesting question because I don't think of things in those terms. I think. In many ways, that's such a negative reading for people, But I could be absolutely a bias that shows, And I do think very early that bias shows up. I mean, we talked about it with Snyder Cuts, and especially when we talked about Man of Steel and its the reaction it got as opposed to the movies that we were getting in the MCU, and so. It is interesting, though, because I think one of the things that as we get to Captain America, the goodwill that Marvel has fostered for itself is already paying off, right? It has garnered goodwill with people. It's put that in the bank, and it's going to keep using it, And and for the most part, I mean, even though Iron Man 2 was a misstep for both you and I, and, we talked about it. Thor was a misstep for me, and not as much you now. The the general public was enjoying what it was getting from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I don't think that, I don't even think that at this point we had seen the ultimate vitriol that will happen when we I don't think the internet responds badly to a film until we get to Man of Steel is a demarcation line, and then it just goes downhill from there with the way that people start reacting to things on social media. But Marvel has really been enjoying, I think, for the most part with these films and that time period, goodwill on social media, goodwill with fans, and it created a lot of goodwill that just continued to roll out. So I don't know. I don't know if I've answered the question in any way, shape, or form other than to say that I personally had just never really thought of it that way until now, and there is a good possibility that that's the case, where it is the first inkling that there really is a difference between the way people reacted to the franchises and unfairly dumped on one rather than the other.
Yeah, I think that there's also, speaking of the goodwill that you're talking about, they're taking Iron Man's a surprise hit. I think we can all admit that. At least from my perspective, Iron Man, like I said when we started talking about it, we'd seen superhero movies before. We'd seen X-Men. And so we knew it could be done, but we didn't know it could be done of such a quality that people who weren't comic book fans would enjoy it. So that becomes sort of like, oh, okay, normal people enjoy this too. That's cool. And then Iron Man 2, for all of its flaws, is a hit again. Thor brings people in. Chris Hemsworth becomes a dreamboat for everybody. But even that early on, they're bringing Sir Anthony Hopkins to the table. That's a big name. You sort of command respect with that. And I think when you get to Captain America, older fans, especially by that point, know the history of trying to have a Captain America film brought to life. So the simple fact that one got made that was worth watching was a stunner, sort of the way Iron Man was, where it's like, oh, wow, okay, they can do this, and it doesn't have to be so hyper-targeted to a single audience. Right. So I think it's fair to presume both of us saw this in the movie theater, right?
Yes, and I gotta answer my own question because I never did, about the director, but I think both of them probably could have been fine. I don't love, honestly, the idea that Favreau has to make this more of a comedy. I don't think that's the right go, and I'll answer that question as to why I don't think in a minute, but I think Joe Johnston is actually the perfect director because, like you rightly pointed out, he's already done a movie like this, and it was The Rocketeer. And that movie is practically perfect, and it plays exactly within this time period. And it's exactly what you want this movie to feel like, right? You want it to have that almost timeless quality that anybody can jump into. And, of course, their jumping off point with Johnston really is they want this to feel like Raiders of the Lost Ark. They want this to have that type of quality to it where it doesn't matter that it takes place in a time period that we're not in. You just feel as though you can watch it in any moment, and I think, and of course, obviously his work with Star Wars and his design work there, I think all works in his favor. Because again, that is almost, and legitimately, I think that's the quality that you want. And so the reason I think that's the case is because, with Superman, the word was verisimilitude, right? And I think what Johnston brings to this that is absolutely necessary for Captain America is a sense of earnestness. It's he's not treating this as chintzy or winking at the camera or any of those type of things. He is treating it with utmost earnestness. And that's the same thing that we want from the character of Captain America as well. And so by directing it in that way, I think what he does is he's the right choice. Like, I think the idea of taking this and being more comedy is the wrong choice. This character has to come off as completely believable, and he's the hardest character to bring to life because he is basically the Superman of this universe, which is he is the moral arbiter to which everything else is judged by. You know, he is the paragon of virtue, and that's, again, it's very hard to do that if you don't have this kind of very earnest and sincere take, and that sincerity, I think, is what makes this film work and what makes Johnston the perfect choice.
Well, I go in one direction where I think Johnston is the right choice because he's very comfortable with effects.
That too,
and
absolutely.
They bring it to bear. I don't think that Johnston brings anything that is excessively passionate, and I'm not taking anything away from him, but he's not grafting on high drama onto this. He's taking a script and he is directing this script very well, and the story structure is focused and it moves, and he understands the rules of storytelling, and he understands, again, I think the most important thing with selling it to the audience, aside from the earnestness, because Chris Evans gives a terrific performance. He is exactly right. He is exactly right for Captain America, and somebody got him there. Mm-hmm. A director is integral in the performance that somebody gives. I think that this could have been done by another director. I just think that Johnston is the right one in those very technical terms.
Sure.
And I think that's very key, especially because, and the thing is, I didn't know at what point I would like sort of throw this out there, but in terms of the digital filmmaking, both the photography and the composites, this is, I think, one of the ones more than Thor. There are problems in Iron Man 2, but I think more than Thor, there are moments here where the technology is still about 5 years away from what they're trying to pull off. I do not deduct points for that. I want to be very clear about that. Anybody who has ever listened to us have discussions, I don't do that. But it is an honest assessment to say there are some composites where it just doesn't, there's an inconsistency. Let's put it this way. There is an inconsistency with the effects that at a certain point gets, I don't know the right word, but it does take me out of it at moments because it's like, oh, suddenly the composite's not matching up right, or there's too much blur around somebody's, face or something. And it's like, okay. Again, saying that I don't take anything away from the movie for it, but I wonder if it's just been, this is the first time we're really encountering because if you look at the credits, farming it out to so many different effects houses.
Yeah.
You sacrifice some consistency for the sake of putting the movie together.
Sure. And I do think that you have a good point there. I think one of the things that maybe helps this film for me rather than other, let's say the issues that I have with Thor, right, is with this movie, everything is for the most part, it's pretty grounded. There are some fantastical elements, much like with The Rocketeer, where, we're dealing with hyper reality in the sense of, we've added these kind of like, it's reality with a Tesseract involved. So that means that some of the designs are going to get, sci-fi-ish, especially 40s sci-fi-ish, right?
Yeah.
No. Wait, hold on. But what I'm saying by that is that I think for me, the effects always, they're good enough, and it's not where they're trying to give me something that is so unbelievable that then I really start like focusing on the effect. And I guess I'm having a different reaction than you did. Whereas I feel like I don't know.
I'm talking strictly in terms of the compositing. There are definitely moments where the background doesn't quite. Oh, sure, match
like
up
the train
right
scene.
And
yeah, I mean that's
the
pretty terrible,
train
actually.
scene, but I got a kick out of it because I was like, oh, this is sort of like a test bed for Solo, a Star Wars story.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm going to see this a few years later in a better way. But I'm talking about just a number of things. There are certain moments where when Chris Evans's face is mapped on the smaller body, like it's so almost there. Like I know that 10 years later it would be perfect. And when he runs out into Times Square at the end, spoilers, you can tell he's not really there. And you can tell that Nick Fury's not really there. And it's one of those things where it's like, I know, again, you go 5 years down the road, it's going to look better. And so that's why I'm saying I'm not deducting points for it, but you can tell that they were just a little too ambitious. And I don't know whether that's a matter of work with fewer effects houses to get the consistency locked up, or if there are certain scenes that they shot later and they were like, okay, we just got to slap something behind it because we have to get it to a certain point, sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I know they did some reshoots on this movie and stuff like that, and absolutely there's like a whole list of effects houses that they worked with. It's crazy because they were trying to get this done. So I agree. It is, I would say, for the most part, it's one of the things that hampers the movie just a little bit, in the sense that it doesn't look as good as it possibly could. And part of that is because, as much as the reality of this film, it's also a tougher film for them to do because so much of it has to be composited. Even the scenes when, you're in 1940s, all that stuff has to be recreated outside of the sets that you're using because none of that really exists anymore. Nothing looks like it does at all. So, I mean, that's all something that has to be created these days in a computer and digitally added set extension wise.
Right. I mean, the overall impression with a lot of those moments, though, is sort of like with Peter Jackson's King Kong when they're going around New York at the end. Yeah. Where it's like, it's just not quite there yet. Yeah. And the thing is, again, I'm not hacking on it, and I'm not deducting points for it or anything. I'm just saying, it's one of those technical notes. But then again, that's, and it's not a damning with faint praise sort of thing. I think Johnston is comfortable enough with it that he gets it he likely got it to the best point it could get because he's there from the beginning. He knows all of the rules for constructing those shots. Yeah. And so that technical edge probably is why he was the best choice at the time.
Well, it doesn't help that they were doing, 3D on this movie and working with some 3D cameras and all that jazz that was really cumbersome back at the 3D. Time. So yes, I did see this in the theater. And did you also ended up seeing this one in the theater? Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, I was excited to see Captain America in the movie theater. I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, Captain America. Like, I love Captain America. Who doesn't love Captain America? Like you said, he's Marvel's Superman. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I want to see this guy on screen.
Well, and it's so interesting, too, because, I think even just coming in initially, I think this became this did become a demarcation line for Marvel in the sense that, like, before we even get to anywhere thinking of Civil War, there's the dichotomy for fans of like Iron Man's your favorite character or Captain America is your favorite character. And it's like, and for me, I mean, absolutely 100%. I love Iron Man as a film and I love Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. I think it's fantastic. We already talked about that. But Captain America in the Marvel Universe is my man. And I think it obviously, for anybody who knows me, it makes sense why that would be the case because, yes, he's the Superman of this universe. And, I think the thing I ended up initially responding to the most was I just love, and this is why I brought up the whole thing with Johnston as director and his kind of, I think, the sincerity with which he, I think, directs the film but it's also, I think, Chris Evans plays this perfectly because the character could come off as an annoying, like, goody two-shoes, but he imbues this character with so much sense of purpose, with so much goodness, with so much just innate goodness that you gravitate towards him as the character, And I think part of that is the way in which they're able to play him as little Steve before you get to Captain America. He wins you over as being this guy who yeah, he's super small and skinny and all those things and asthmatic and like everything under the book that would make him not work in the army at that point. But he has the right heart for it. And it's not just the heart, but it's like he has the innate sense of being that's good that makes him that character, you know, obviously before he gets the power, which is what makes him so special in the first place. And Chris Evans, I think just the casting in this movie is absolutely perfect. There's nobody in this movie who is not, I think, perfectly cast, especially in the main roles. And part of that, I think, comes from the fact that they all play them straight. Like, they all play them as... There's just never any winking at the camera, and Chris Evans, I think, is the pinnacle of that in this film.
I mean, the wisdom of casting Chris Evans is, you know, it pays off big time, and he is, I think you're right. He's great in this role. He is terrific. This is the role he was born to play. I think the only problem, structure-wise, with the movie is that Cap's arc is a bit blunted. On this revisit, it is one of those things where his emotional arc doesn't ever quite get to where I think it's gonna go, which is we have the aha moment at the end, but then the denouement, if you want to use a college boy term, is very quick afterward. Runs out to Times Square. Oh, you're here 70 years later. Boom, 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 boom. And I would have liked to spend more time with Cap's reaction, the shell shock of it all. And I was actually thinking in terms of story structure, the way that they go with it is we start in modern day, go to the 40s. Cap, quote unquote, dies to everybody in the 40s. And then suddenly he's in Times Square. Boom, we've set it all up. Now all the characters are in place. I do think that it would have been a more interesting emotional journey in the movie to have it be something where Cap wakes up and says, I thought I was dead. And they start talking to him. Oh, no. Why don't you take us through it? Why don't you tell us what happened? Start from the beginning. And it's him narrating. And then every so often he comes back. He's like, but I still, and you have whatever you need to cut back in. And then at the end, when he has that realization that it's all been a thing, a construct around him, I think it's more impactful because he wakes up and because we know he's not going to die at the end of the movie, right? So why even treat that as a possibility with the plane going down, right? Have it start out with him confused. I thought I was dead. He thinks he's in the 1940s. No, we won the war, son. Wait, we won the war? Yeah, you were out of it for a little while. And then we get to that point where just sort of like a frog boiling and then he busts out. And he's like, and then he sees the real world. And it's almost like a Twilight Zone-ish type of thing. But I think at the same time, that would have given the character more of the arc, more of the emotional arc that he deserves. And again, this doesn't take anything away from Evans. It's just that Evans is where Cap needs to be at all times, as opposed to giving him any sort of greater trajectory. Now, we'll see that greater trajectory later, but I think that is what winds up making the story structure here suffer a little bit, because they know they're going to get to that. Whereas in older days where you were like, I'm just getting this one movie, you would put more of that arc in here.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I can see what you're saying, because I do think that one of the things you would like to have in this movie is, and I think that the one place that I will, I was talking to my wife after we watched the film, and I think the one place that I would kind of ding the movie just a little bit is that I do want, in the montage sequence where they're taking down all the Hydra bases, I want there to be something more there and something personal there for Steve instead of it just being a montage sequence. Because I feel like I do want one more I want one more like emotional hurdle for him. I want one more just growth point, I think is what I'm looking for. And it's not a bad choice because the movie's already long, so I get why they're not doing it. And I think what you just pointed out is the way to which you could actually have helped make that happen without making the movie longer. You're just cutting in with the basically the reaction of Steve now, and then like you said, I think also by him telling the story like that and then being like, "Where's Peggy?" and then the emotional punch is even worse because Peggy's gone, or Peggy as he knew her is gone. I mean, she's still alive. We'll spoiler alert. She's still alive, but she's in her 80s, and so there's this. It would be horrendous, right? And just again, emotional gut punch of being like, oh, she's in a nursing home, so all of that I think is it's just something that could have been really great in that sense. The one thing, though, and I've got to say, because I was talking about the sincerity with which Evans plays the role, I think also the thing that I find really beautiful about this film is by setting it in the 40s, having him be this man out of time that they're going to play with later on, but having him here and getting to experience him make the moral choices to which he does, I think there's something so beautiful about Captain America representing the embodiment of America by saying that he understands power because he also understands what happens when people misuse it, because he's had that experience in and of himself. In much the way that America itself, we choose to become a country because we have another country lording its power over us in a way that it shouldn't. And therefore we choose to become, our own country at that point. And so that misuse of power is what has created and crafted America in that way. Captain America then represents the best of that in and of himself because he also understands that. And I think that's the beauty of then what we'll do is shifting him then into the future, quote unquote, the present, and having him still be that moral arbiter, who we've clearly set him up as that in this film. And I think it just does such a great job of crafting that and setting that up so that they can use it for the future. But I think it plays out very well within the film itself, which is really important for the character.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could have been better, but that's a structural thing. I'm not going to lay that at Johnston's feet, and I think that Johnston is also he is the type of director that's going to work with what he has, as opposed to like a Nolan is involved from word one, on a script, and so it's just a different sort of approach. Again, I love Joe Johnston. Like, if I see Joe Johnston's name on a project, I tend to go see it because I like what he does with stuff, and he likes to push the boundaries. And like you said, Rocketeer earns him endless points with me. Because of Rocketeer, you put his name on something, I'm like, yep, I'll go see it. Now, the thing is, we usually leave music for later, and I want to make a point to talk about it. Let's do it. I really do. Okay. Silvestri comes back to do this score. We weren't nuts about previous work. We didn't find anything really... I was big on Doyle. I thought Doyle delivered what he needed to for Thor.
So did I.
How do you feel about Silvestri here in Captain America? Do you think that this is the score Cap needs, or this is just a score that's good enough to get him there? I
have always liked this score, and I have always liked the thematic work that we get for Cap. I think, one of the things that obviously he's playing with is, those kind of very quote-unquote Americana patriotic type themes. And I think that he gives Captain America, I mean, it's memorable. I got it in my head, and I think he does a great job with honoring the character in that way by giving him a theme that fits his character, fits who he is, what he represents. I think he does a good job in scoring the film as well, and creating something that's enjoyable to listen to, works perfectly with the film. Obviously, they have a lot of fun with the musical number in the movie as well here, and kind of creating that whole song there, which I think also works perfectly with the sensibilities of like thinking of like, oh, we were going to create like a 1940s, type of musical number and theme for this character. What would it sound like? So, I mean, right there with Thor, and I think even more than Thor, to me, this represents the character fully, the most that we have gotten thematically for the character, because it feels like what you would expect a Captain America theme to sound like. So that, I mean, I feel like it's one of those things, like if I were to play you the theme for this and play you the theme for Thor, you would probably be able to say, oh, that sounds like that's Captain America's theme. Whereas Thor's, it could be any number of characters' themes. Again, I thought the work was good, and I praised it when we talked about that, but I just think that Silvestri nailed exactly what they're going for.
I agree. I mean, I don't think it's the best score I've ever heard. I do think the Cap's theme is memorable. I think the rest of the work is fine, but I do have to give a lot of credit for that musical number. I think that sometimes we as audiences don't understand exactly how tricky that is to get that right, to get the in-universe music sounding quite right. And especially when it's real world, that has to sound like something that I believe my grandparents listened to.
Yeah.
And it does. And it works. And it's really well done. And so, yeah, I give the music a few extra points actually on this go round for that, because this is a more fully realized thing. Like you said, I just think that what is at play here is they have a roadmap. And what I sense here, what is sneaking in, is that Silvestri is building to something. Sure. And we know what he is building to. So I think in another sense, much like some of the shortcomings of the film itself, they know what's coming next. So Silvestri can say, okay, here's my overture. I'm about to do the symphony next.
Right. Yep.
And so I think he holds back a little bit on this with the idea toward that's going to be the thing that this all comes together into.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, and we'll talk about it, I think, when we talk about Avengers, but that theme is very reminiscent of this theme in many ways. Like you said, it feels like this is variations on that theme, and therefore, since this is the movie that's leading right into that, and he's the first Avenger, the magnum opus then is what we get in the next film. So I heartily agree with you on that. And yet I would call this so far then, this is the best score. It to me, it trumps Thor's score because it works even better for the actual character we're writing a thematic structure for. Like it, and I think that's where it trumps the Thor score.
Now, I have a question for you, though, because, while we're talking about themes and character and stuff like that, I find it fascinating that this movie, I guess by fans, it does get this sort of credit, but what really does pop this time, this viewing of it, is that Agent Carter is great.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the great crimes of the MCU in general is that this character is so great And I really, on screen, I know that the show Agent Carter happens and stuff like that, but for the average audience member, this is it we get for her.
Right.
And so it's almost, what's really interesting about it is on a larger scale, like what happened with Lady Sif in Thor. That's a character I'm legitimately intrigued in, and I would like to see more about this character. But I know that, especially in the context of these movies, that's just not likely to happen. I just think that's sort of a shame. I'm not going to deduct points from this movie for it, obviously. But I think that I want to get your take on this. Every movie has its cast of supporting characters. Iron Man has his sphere around him. Thor has his sphere of people around him. Cap has his. The Hulk has his, but he is the green one who must not be named, even at this point. What do you think of, the people in Cap's orbit in this movie? Is this just par for the course? Is this the best group surrounding? Are there too many characters surrounding him? Could they have focused it a little bit more?
Man, that is a really good question. I would say, next to Iron Man, this cast is perfect in this film. And I love that you call out as the hallmark for that Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter, who is absolute perfection in this role. Like, she is everything you want, I think, a strong female character to be in the film. There's nothing about her that isn't wonderfully ladylike, and at the same time, in the next sentence, she could snap your neck, because she's an agent, and she's just as strong as anybody else on screen, and yet, she also gives Cap the ability, and Steve the ability, to have those vulnerable moments, because there is also a softness to her as well, and I love the way that this movie plays with the fact that it's okay for men and women to have both sides to them, to be strong and yet have emotion and basically a soft side, and Steve has that. We see that, from the beginning, his goodness and his innate goodness, all of that. And she just allows that to be able to be played on screen. And then, the chemistry she has, not only with Chris Evans, is evident, but then the chemistry she has with Tommy Lee Jones is great.
Oh, and I think Jones is great comedy in this movie.
He's perfect. He's perfect.
He's exactly what he's supposed to be. He's Tommy Lee Jonesing the place up. Yeah. And that's exactly what that character needs to be. Yep. But that gets into, I think, I do think there are a few too many side characters. I like the fact that they gave Cap his cadre of support characters who go on missions with him. Yeah,
the Howling Commandos, yeah.
But there's too much going on. Sure. It's almost as if that's a separate movie that is trying to be contained within this movie, and I don't know what I would cut per se. I think maybe if we had that structure we were talking about earlier, where Cap is narrating, that gives us breaks, and so we're not, if anything seems bouncy or truncated, it's because the narrator is telling us the story, and so we're a little bit more forgiving in that structure. And I just think it's one of those things where I think Johnson does the best job that anybody can, juggling all of these different personalities, and each personality is distinct. That is very much to his credit, is that these characters are distinct characters.
Yes,
nobody bleeds into somebody else. So that's very good, clear direction. Now, the side characters aren't necessarily overly complex characters, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, but that I think, and I could agree with you in the sense that I do feel like what you end up with is just, you are like, man, I just kind of wish I could spend more time with them. Like Neil McDonough as Dum Dum is just great. Like he and all of those guys pop off the screen. They all have their little personality quirks and everything that make them so wonderful, and yet you just want more time. Like, you really do kind of want a whole movie just with those guys and Steve, Sebastian Stan, as Bucky, I think is wonderful, and playing that role of, being the guy that Steve looked up to, and then being the guy who then ends up having strangely to look up to Steve, and like dealing with the ramifications of that, of having your best friend completely change and yet at the same time not change at all. But having to see them in a different light that you didn't expect is really interesting. And I almost wish there was a little bit more time to play with that role reversal, because I think that's a really big element.
But that's what I think I'm getting at. That's what I think is sitting in the back of my mind is there's so much going on in the movie that it would have benefited from just maybe another draft to tighten things up.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of information they're trying to get across, and I think that the biggest stumbling block with all of it is the fact that they're going to great lengths to demonstrate the power of the Tesseract. Because now, of course, sitting here in the front, we know what that's going to build to. I wish that they could have had some way to have demonstration of the power of the Tesseract, the fact that it's a desirable object, without spending quite so long getting to that point, which would have let us focus a little more on the Howling Commandos, and have things told a little bit tighter with just a hair more focus. Maybe cut 5 or 10 minutes out of the movie here or there, and you can just bring that in. So that you're not so obsessed with setting up what the big MacGuffin of the Avengers is going to be.
I think that's one of the places where I think Hugo Weaving obviously is perfect. I mean, he's so good.
You talk about Tommy Lee Jones, or Chris Evans. I think that Hugo Weaving as Red Skull, he pays off. And the thing is, I go into, as soon as I heard, Hugo Weaving is Red Skull, I was like, like okay, that makes sense. Because he just, he's got the Agent Smith thing. He has a very distinct set of features that really, and he can do the glare. When he stares angry at you, you are afraid of him, and that's Red Skull needed that badly. And it's just so that's the thing, right? Is his performance winds up being the thing that keeps an audience from giggling at him pulling off his mask and showing that he's a big noseless skeleton. Like, how ridiculous is that?
Oh, yeah.
How absolutely insane and dumb a concept is Red Skull? How comic book is it? But audiences accept it because Hugo Weaving sells it. And it's like, okay, great. That works.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think because he's so magnetic on the screen, I think one of the things where you could possibly have cut a little bit of time is you could have condensed some of the times you cut back to Red Skull and his scientist, again, who played to perfection by Toby Jones. Excellent casting there as well. Because what you've done, and gosh, Stanley Tucci as the scientist as well. Like, all of these people immediately, they have the gravitas to be able to pull you in automatically and tell you, this is who I am as a character, just because of the fact that they're such good actors. And that's where I don't think because Hugo Weaving and Toby Jones are so good, we don't actually need to spend as much time with them and still have them be as menacing as they are. By cutting back 3-4 times, we could maybe just go 2.
Well, I think you change the framing device to being the flashback. That solves a lot of problems with that. You shorten the amount of time it takes them to talk about the Tesseract in the beginning. Although that scene's great. I love the callback to Raiders of the Lost Ark too, while the Fuhrer is digging around in the desert looking for artifacts. Like, it's that's a wink. That's an Easter egg wink, so that if you get it, you get it. Like, that's the type of joke that really, really works, the type of movie reference. But, you could even shorten it with, instead of having 3 Germans walk in, have the grand tour, have them put the thing up, have them figure out how to shoot somebody, just have them say, so the weapon is ready. Yes, bang, and he vaporizes somebody. He goes, good, because that guy was a spy. If that hadn't worked, he was going to rat us out.
Sure.
And then you can still have the conversation about how Hydra is an organization within the Third Reich that's planning to betray them.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
One of the things I was thinking of last night, my wife and I just watched the movie, and I was thinking about how I had always thought maybe that the musical sequence was maybe a little bit too long. And one of the things that really stuck with me this time is that how that musical sequence is so effective at showing that Steve finds a confidence that he never thought he would have as he moves into this role, right? And that confidence is actually the exact same thing that which enables him to be able to say, I'm going to go save my friends. Like, that he believes that he can do it. He's been playing this ridiculous role, but it's also given him the confidence to actually go out and do it in reality. And I really, it's such a interestingly clever way to show growth in a character. As first he's stumbling over the lines, he's not comfortable on stage, but like he finds a way to get himself into this role, and then that role gives him a confidence there, and that confidence then enables him to actually go out and do something that is truly heroic, truly self-sacrificial, and it just, I really appreciated that about that sequence. And I grew a new appreciation for it because I had always kind of thought maybe in my head that part was a little long, and that's not the part that I would change. I think the only thing
that part's worth sticking.
Yeah, the only thing that I would go for is cutting back less to the villains maybe a little bit, and giving more time with just these actual characters to grow. And I think you're absolutely right in your idea about the just change the structure just slightly here, and you've made something that's good to great, absolutely great. So
yeah, and that's the thing, is I wonder if all of the movies in this quote unquote phase, once they get the Iron Man hit and the Hulk is a hit, and they say, okay, we're going to do this thing. We've got it. We know what we're going to do. Let's plan it out. Let's have our map. I really think that all of these first phase movies, after Incredible Hulk especially, but primarily after Iron Man, they're victims of the bullet points.
Sure.
And I don't mean that the movies are bad as a result. Obviously, anybody that's been listening, the Iron Man 2 is the only one that really fell flat for me. But I'm talking about in terms of they're not focused on singular quality. It's the we're building. They're looking too far down the road at this point, and they're thinking in terms of getting to Avengers instead of Iron Man's the surprise hit, because Iron Man's just telling Iron Man's story. And even to an extent, the Hulk is telling just the Hulk story. But one last question I want to ask you is, we've now gotten two great villains in a row. We've gotten Loki, we've gotten Red Skull. Given your problems with Thor, given our compliments of both Weaving and Hiddleston, who do you think has the better screen presence as a villain? Like, if somebody had said to you coming out of this, one of these two is going to become the main villain in Avengers, the big team-up movie, they're both basically dead in the cosmos after this. And they're like, we're going to bring them back. We know Loki's come back because of the stinger. Which one would you bet on being the supernatural force in the next movie? Which one would you want, actually, is the big question. Somebody says, do you want Loki or do you want Red Skull?
I mean, at that point, not knowing anything, I mean, I might have just picked either. I probably would be just a little bit closer with saying, let's go with Loki, because I think even then you can see there's so much room to play with that character. I mean, legitimately just the sky, it just, there's no ceiling on what you can do with Loki, honestly, just because he's so rich. And I think the one, and part of that is because there is nuance to the character. Like, you get a sense of like him having more to him than just being a complete villain, whereas Red Skull, he's just a villain. And there's never any question about, and that's perfect for this movie. And that's perfect, obviously, it's hard to make anybody who's working with the Nazis sympathetic in any way, shape, or form, and you don't want him to be sympathetic, right? So, and I think because of that, I would say Loki, but I think you're absolutely right in the sense that, yeah, these two films back to back do create excellent villains, and I think one of the things that I will really comment the movie with is that this movie, there is no massive CGI battle at the end, because it's two guys fighting in an airplane that's about to crash, which is so personal. And, it doesn't have that thing that many comic books did, which, there is some CGI stuff before we get to this, but like the intimate battle just between the villain and the hero here is really good and actually small scale compared to some of the other things we've gotten in the MCU even to this point. I mean, obviously we talked about how that hurt Hulk, by them being too ambitious in that sense. This is the perfect scale, and so, yeah, I think they do a really good job in that, and I think, yeah, I would go with either of them, but lean more towards Loki just because, we've got, I think more to play with that character.
I can honestly say I didn't think Loki would ever become the prime shaker that he did. Like I obviously I'd seen the Stinger like everybody else and everything, but it's still baffling to me. It's such a unique choice to make Loki a prime mover. Like it's just I was expecting a third and different villain in Avengers, and so it was odd.
Did anything change for you here, like good or bad, with this rewatch?
Not really. I think I'm more at peace with the things that didn't work for me. It's typical sort of thing. Like I think we talked about this with like Iron Man 2 or even Hulk or, even Thor, where it's like there are certain things that don't work, but when you come at them again, you already know they don't work. So you're a lot more forgiving because there's not that in the moment sort of reaction that goes on with it. So I think I wind up actually, lack of a better word, happier with Captain America, the First Avenger this time around. I remember that first viewing coming out, and my reaction was very much like, yeah, it was good. I really like Chris Evans, and that was basically my reaction with it. Coming at it now, more forgiving of all, sort of the things I was picking on, but additionally, those are structure things that would have had to be fixed at the script level and stuff like that. Yep. But I think that knowing also where it's going to go helps this movie more than any of the previous ones that we've rewatched. Like knowing that this one is teeing up what comes next, I think helps it. What about you? Did anything change, shift in one direction or the other?
I don't think anything really. To me, I've always liked this movie. Like I always enjoyed it, and always liked it. Always had a real heart for it. It's actually one of my higher ranked Marvel films, honestly, on my list, just of all Marvel overall, and nothing's really changed in that sense. I think part of that is that, and one of the things, obviously, that I had praised the original Iron Man for is just how well everybody's cast and how well they all play together as the cast ameliorates a lot of, if any, issues I have with this movie, even the ones that we've talked about, and we've agreed on mostly here. But the thing about it is that I find this movie so enjoyable to watch because what everybody's doing on screen is so much fun as they interact together that I don't really have any problems watching it, even though I intellectually can see how things could be better. It's like, but, I like watching Chris Evans and Haley Atwell and, all these people play together in this sandbox. And so I'm not really frustrated by it in any way other than just the intellectual exercise of being like, oh, well, I could have done this, like, so I think that's one of the things which all the issues I had with Thor came in with the fact that I wasn't enjoying the main character, and therefore, and not Chris Hemsworth. Like, I like Chris Hemsworth, and I think he's a good actor. He's really funny. All those things. Just the character as written, I wasn't enjoying as much, and therefore it was hurting the movie. Whereas here, I'm loving Chris Evans, but I'm also loving the character as written. And of course, for me, because he represents so much like the Superman character as well, and those ideals and those thematic elements playing with him, and all of that is right in my wheelhouse to love. So absolutely, I mean, I just there was really nothing honestly that's changed. And I think what then happens for me is that where we'll go next is the impact then that Cap has and that this has on the entire Marvel universe is massive, right? Like, he's a shift in the rest of the series going forward, and I think that's also something that I love, and therefore, I guess with the movie, I don't know, any other thoughts or questions you had, I guess, before we give a rating?
No, that's my big question is, where do you rate this? Where do you come down with this? Because I know that we have set up here, I know that Iron Man is 4.5 for you, and I still teeter.
I think I gave it 5.
4.5. No, I'm pretty sure you gave it 4.5.
Okay, I couldn't remember.
I'm the one that always forgets.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I forgive me for forgetting, but yep, 4.5. You're right. Mm-hmm.
So where are we with Captain America: The First Avenger?
Yes, I give this a 4, and that is because as much I enjoy the film. I can watch honestly The First Avenger anytime. It's one of those really super enjoyable comic book films for me. All the things I've said, but intellectually, I can also say it could have been better, but that doesn't hurt my enjoyment of the film. So I think it is an absolutely 100% solid 4. It's just like to earn another half star or a whole other star, there would have been to have those structural changes made that we discussed. But, I mean, when you have a cast that works this well together, and I think a score that works this well together, and thematic elements that work this well together, I mean, that's a solid 4.
I am in a generous mood. So while I probably at some point will have it fall back to a 3, I did enjoy it despite its structural sins. I did enjoy it enough to say 3.5 because I enjoy the Agent Carter character so much, because I enjoy Tommy Lee Jones and Hugo Weaving. Like, I enjoy this cast, and like you said, they're having fun. This time around, give it a 3.5, just because it's, let's put it in 40s terms. It's got moxie, kid. And there are things I'm willing to roll with just because, but there will always be that shadow over it of what I think it could have done, but didn't. And so that comes to, how are we going to organize the rankings here? Because I've basically put this on relatively equal footing with Thor at this point.
Yeah.
Giving, shockingly, Leterrier's The Incredible Hulk the edge as a movie, which, considering all things, is odd to me. Like, it's surprising to me that I come out like that. So I want to know what your ranking is while I try to remember how I ranked things previously.
Well, I still have to go Iron Man number 1. And then for me, it's Captain America, the First Avenger at this point. And then it would be The Incredible Hulk. And then it would be Iron Man 2. And then it would be Thor.
I'm going to go Iron Man still in the number 1 slot. This is going to shock you. Captain America, the First Avenger, even though having lower star ranking, edges out The Incredible Hulk, because The Incredible Hulk is an ask. And the Captain America: The First Avenger is what I would call a background movie. I could have this playing while I'm doing something else and enjoy it. Whereas Hulk, it's asking a lot of attention.
Sure.
And I know that seems weird. It's like, well, you gave it 4 stars. It's like, yeah, but Captain America is just it's just lighter, and it's I like the main character more. So even though there are these structural problems, I wind up putting Captain America 2, then the Incredible Hulk, then Thor, and then Iron Man 2 remains ranked dead last, as it will for quite a while yet.
No, I think it's really cool though, and I can understand. I mean, because I totally understand why Cap wins out, and I for me personally, I think part of it just has to do with there is Captain America: The First Avenger comes very close to what I think so many people ended up loving about Superman the movie. There's just such an earnestness to it that so many people responded to and absolutely adored. And I do think that's what you were when you were saying it feels a little bit easier. Like, I think that's what you're talking about. Like, there is just this sense of like joy to it that is ineffable, and it's hard to describe. But yeah, you just and really, even though it kind of has this almost like a downer of an ending, you come away feeling good. And part of that is just because of who the character is, what he represents, what he stands for, and that makes you feel good, And so, yeah, it's hard not to love Captain America.
So that'll tee us up for the next movie, which is going to be He Who Shall Not Be Named, Marvel's The Avengers. And let's see how the team gels in the next one. So, that's where we're headed. My gosh. And, just to tee it up, I'll never forget my friend Joey at the time saying, before the movie even came out, he said, when you were a kid, would you have even ever dreamed that there would be an Avengers movie?
Yeah.
And I remember looking at him and saying, no, I never thought that this would ever be a thing that happened. Yeah.
No, I'm just right there with you, man. To think something like this could happen. So, well, before we get there, John, if anybody wants to catch up with you, of course, and just talk about what we've been doing here on Assembling Avengers, or see what else you've got going on, where can they find you?
Look for Kessel Junkie online, KESSELJUNKIE. I am on your social network of choice, but not mine. It's a very strange sort of dance that we have. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network, co-hosting 2 shows. One show is called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors, whether it's their entire career by decade or other strange combinations. And you can find me co-hosting what I think is a delightful Star Wars show called Aggressive Negotiations, which is co-hosted with my dear friend, you may know him, Matt Rushing.
Well, I hope you'll check that out. And if you would like to, you can also follow me anywhere on social media under the name Matt Rushing02. That's my moniker for all of the social media platforms I'm on, so just search for me there. Of course, you could find me here on the network on the main show, The 602 Club, which this show is in the feed of. And of course, with that, you can also find Snyder Cuts that John and I mentioned here. As well, that you can find that in the archives or on the website at trek.fm. You can also find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, and Warp 5. Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek. The Orb's about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, I did a little show with my friend Drea Kaufman. We talked about Harry Potter. We did it 1 chapter at a time. We did the entire series, and that was called Owlpost. It's a finished show, so you can find the entire show lined up for you there over on the Nerd Party Network. But you know what? As always, thank you so much for joining us.
Avengers!